yeah, I'm happy about that. She's my world. You have kids,
Great.
Pearl?
Yeah, I think we're already 4 minutes in. So
Okay.
hi and welcome everyone. This is our last and final webinar for the year 2022. So far, we had 4 webinars, and this is going to be the 5th of the Cut the Clutter series that we started off early this year. So now the good news is we started off in March with, like data governance as the first webinar session. And of course, Charles only taking care of it. And now we are back again in the 5th one where he's going to dive deeper into the topic. So that's pretty cool. I'm right, Charles?
Yeah, I guess I started and ended for the year 2022. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this one.
Right. So I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time and to join us. And we look forward to having an enriching session. We will, we'll give a couple of minutes for the others to join in. Till the time, let me start by putting some housekeeping rules. So this webinar is going to be an hour session long, and we will have our speaker, Charles Smart, who will present for the first 40 minutes. And the last 15-20 minutes will be left for the question answers round. Of course, in the second part of the session, which is dedicated to answering any questions, thoughts, feedbacks, or doubts, and the last 5 minutes will be left for the closing comments. If you see on the bottom right of the window, you will find a Q&A box where you can drop your questions, and towards the end of the session, Charles will address those questions. Okay, and the good news is the recording of this webinar will be made available to each of you in your inbox soon after the session ends. Now, before we start and before I hand over to Charles, I'd like to introduce him who's the speaker for today. And folks who have already attended the data governance part 1 of the series might know that this face is quite familiar. So Charles is an information management consultant leading the implementation of enterprise data initiatives. He also leads the data governance team at FactSpan. He has his previous experience of assisting several Fortune 100 companies embracing a strong foundation of data governance to help develop a strong data culture. So now, Charles, the floor is all yours. And give me a second, I'll share the screen.
Okay, thank you, Pearl. Welcome, everyone. Making sure I start my timer so I don't speak longer than I'm supposed to about each of these sessions and give everyone a chance to, ask questions. So as Pearl mentioned earlier, this is our second webinar on data governance, and we're going to be talking today about how to get started. So the last webinar, of course, we addressed what data governance is, the different frameworks, and of course, the functions within those frameworks and how those frameworks can help you to get started. But today we're going to deep dive into 3 of the main areas that will help to lay a really solid foundation for your data governance program. If you are started already or getting started, and the 3 main areas that we're going to be talking about today are your data policies, data quality, which I'm sure if you're talking about data governance, many of you may have some initiative that's going on around that. And of course, data cataloging. And so we're going to dig into each of these components. But before that, we're going to just kind of take a quick step back and talk about what data governance is. And for those of you who may be very new to the topic and joining us for the first time. So data governance ultimately is data, people, process, and policies, and how those things work together. Of course, we have our data. We all use it. The organization, the people in the organization use the data, and they use it within processes, whether it's for reporting, for processing the data, or for storing it in some capacity. And of course, there's a bunch of policies that dictate how you do it, when you do it, under what circumstances you need to do it. And really at its core, that's what data governance is. And there are principles around this, of course, making sure that there's accountability and there's ownership, and there's an ability to be able to identify and find your information, and people can trust that data. So as we think about, going forward, to the next slide for me, Pearl, data governance, we look at it as an overall arching framework. And there are many different conversations out there, or different perspectives, I should say, about what data governance is and what it looks like. here at FactSpan, how we look at data governance is within these 5 key pillars, right? There's governance and stewardship, there's your data architecture, there's of course the ability to discover and understand your data, where it is and what it looks like. And of course, there's this new dimension of how we need to be able to manage our data because of all the new policies and privacy, generally speaking, for data subject rights, and of course, data security, how we're protecting our data. This is an overarching framework, and each of these bullet points that you see on that slide really reflect the different functions. We're not going to talk about all those functions today. We're going to be highlighting those 3 main functions we talked about before, which are policy, data quality, and cataloging. But just to let you know that data governance is a broad framework that encompasses a number of different functions, and it's not just one particular thing. Now, some of the pitfalls to avoid when you're getting started with your data governance program, of course, is to make sure that you have some kind of a leadership. You want to have a strategy. You want to make sure that you understand what's the journey, where are we starting, where are we going, and be clear about that. And many data projects, whether it's data governance or your business intelligence projects or your data engineering projects within your organization, a lot of those organizations and those projects fail because of a lack of leadership to some degree, and also support from the organization where there's a clear strategy about how this is going to solve a business problem. So that's one of the main things that's important when you're establishing your data governance program, to make sure that there's a clear strategy and there's a problem that you're going to be solving. Because if you're solving a problem, then people are going to see the value in it, and it's going to be very easy for you to be able to scale that. And if you don't have the support of your leadership, they'll get attention because you're solving problems and help you to be able to move forward. Also want to just emphasize that tool implementation is not data governance, right? So because you have a data governance tool, that may be a cataloging tool or something that does discovery or privacy, and many organizations out there, vendors, sell their products as data governance tools, but a tool doesn't solve your data governance issues. You need to have that holistic view that takes into encompasses all those areas that we talked about before. And it needs to be a part of your culture. Don't think to start with everything. Start small, measure it, scale it, and one size doesn't fit all, right? Every organization is different. Let's figure out what's going on within your organization. Set your priorities first. Figure out a small deliverable that you can deliver on, and then demonstrate, how you're going to move forward with that. Now we're going to jump into the nuts and bolts. So we're going to talk about policy first. And as we talk about policy, there's a change that's happened in the data regulation space globally because of EU GDPR. And EU GDPR has really driven a lot of new regulations that are being passed here in the United States around how organizations need to manage and use and process consumer data. And that is quite significant because it now has implications that come with it. There are risks, of course, for non-compliance, which are penalties that organizations have to pay in order to, if they are not found non-compliant. And right now, there are 5 new data regulations that are going to be coming online within the next year. So 2023, we have CCPA that's going to be, of course, that's already in play, but you have CPRA, which takes effect in January, and a number of other regulations for Utah, Colorado, Virginia, and a number of other states that are at some stage of the process of getting their, privacy bills passed into legislation as law. And what this means for organizations is, hey, you need to be able to understand how to be able to effect these data subject rights. So the ability to erase people's data, rectify their information, give them the notifications for consent and restriction and all of these things. So it's really important that you're paying attention, and data governance is one of the pillars that help and support your ability to be compliant with these new and changing data regulations. If we go further, we're going to talk a little bit about, some of the fines. So just to kind of highlight, some of the organizations that have been hit already by GDPR and CCPA had recently had their first organization. Sephora was fined $1.2 million, which was relatively small in comparison to the $887 million that Amazon was fined for non-compliance with GDPR. However, what this is showing is that as you see the new regulations coming online, is that this is not going anywhere, and new states are coming on, and data governance is one of the ways that helps you to be compliant with these policies and these regulations, that you don't face these fines and, of course, the embarrassment also that comes with it, and the trust that you lose with your consumers when they realize that you're not managing their data properly. So going on, we're going to talk a little bit about how data policies and the governance come together. So your data regulations basically drive policies within your organization, or they should, right? And you want to make sure that your organizations may have had policies that existed already about how you use data or how you process data, or they may not be up to date. But you want to make sure that your policies are in line with those data regulations, because those things, if you are not implementing them and you're not aware of them, you can't communicate them to your organization in order for them to be able to implement them. And at the core of this, those policies also help and give you guardrails and standards for how you want to implement your different data governance functions. So you talk about things like, data cataloging and how people use your data, right, within the organization. And of course, being able to fulfill your data subject rights. So if you have someone that says, hey, I want to get all of my customer data, that's all my PII data, where does it reside, right? And how should this be used? You need to make sure that you understand where that data resides, and you have clear policies about how that data should be used, who can access it, how they are able to access it, and you have some tools around that dictate what needs to be done. And the things within an organization that help to accomplish that are your data policies. And of course, by implementing these data policies, it enables your different data governance functions. So it facilitates acceleration of compliance, right? So because you're doing this not just from a regulatory perspective, but also from an operational perspective, this is going to significantly improve your ability to govern your organization's data, and of course, reap all the benefits that come from having a strong data governance program. And marrying the data policies with your data is extremely important. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. We're going to kind of show you just a high level of, these are some of the policies to focus on, by the way. So you have your data classification policy, your retention policy, your usage policy, your access policy, security policy, and your data privacy policy. And your data classification policy defines how different categories of data that are handled across the other policies. And it's really the master policy that you want to make sure that you do this one first. So if you've done nothing else around policy within your organization, you want to figure out, where do I get started? Make sure your data classification policy is done, because it's going to lay out the categories of data. It's going to talk about the different classification and sensitivity levels. So you may have internal or regulated or confidential data. And you want to make sure that as you have those different categories of data, that as you think about how you implement these other policies within your organization, you are being able to reference these categories of data. So in a broad scope, you are able to create all these other policies referencing those classifications. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to create the, if you're starting with your policy, your classification, what are the steps that you go through? So let's jump to that and just walk through it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you discover and you identify, where your policies reside, right? So if you go to the next slide for me, please, Pearl. You want to make sure that you understand within your organization where your policies are, right? So identifying where they are, making sure that you understand, are there duplicates? Many organizations may have multiple policies that are spread across because they've acquired other companies, because things have changed, different departments create their own policies, but you want to make it sure you actually have an enterprise policy that is one for the entire organization. And that policy should not have duplicates. You should not have contradictions or discrepancies with them. And you want to make sure that those policies are also aligned with your different data regulations. And you're not just having these policies randomly made up based on what you think, but that you're implementing them based on the different regulations so that your organization can be compliant with, and making sure that you're not going to be fined or, found to violate it. And then, of course, the next thing you want to do is you want to coordinate and consolidate that. So you want to make sure if you're doing this from your data governance program, or your data governance initiative is the one that's driving the organization to get these policies in place, we want to make sure that we're going to be coordinating and consolidating that with your GRC, right? So your governance, risk, and compliance department, of course, making sure that you also include your legal team to review those policies to make sure that they are in line. And once that reference is done and you've created that, you want to then think about, how do I now democratize this, right? How, now that you made sure that you have your policies, they are up to date, all the discrepancies are taken care of, they're aligned with your different regulations. How do I now take those policies and align them with my data, right? And align them with your data generally requires you to have some kind of a cataloging tool that gives you the ability to add attributes to your data, right? So you may have a column in your database and it's first name, and you want to indicate on your cataloging tool, hey, this particular column needs to be used or it's classified in this particular manner. And it can be used by these individuals. It's owned by this person, and of course, some of the other attributes. But you want to make sure that you're able to take your policies and make them actionable and visible and democratize them to the organization so that they can find out about it. And of course, many of these cataloging tools will also give you the ability to click on that particular policy if you don't understand what it means, to see the definition of it and be able to see a more verbose explanation of what it is that's okay and not okay. And those are some of the implicit things, but you're also able to implement them in explicit ways where people are restricted from being able to do certain things if you implement those policies within your data stores that the data actually resides. So when to move away from, siloed data policy, repositories, integration is, and you want to prioritize your critical data when you're trying to make sure that your policies are up to date and democratized and attached to your data. So, making sure that those data elements that are going to be associated with a particular data regulation are the ones you want to focus on first. So your PII data mainly, right? And so if we look at some of the tools that help you to accomplish that, we're going to talk a little bit about, Calibra and Big ID and Informatica DPM and OneTrust. And these are some of the leaders that are in the space around data, privacy specifically, because they sell themselves really as a privacy solution, but they also give you the ability to find your data, to create your policies, apply your policies to the data, and also integrate workflows within them so that you're able to track the policies and make sure you're also able to track whether or not your organization is staying compliant. There are things like your privacy impact assessments that need to be performed. With some of these tools like OneTrust and Big ID come with the capability of having those workflows implemented, or Calibra, which gives you the ability to classify your data within their tool. And of course, Informatica, that gives you the ability to also have risk scores around your data so that you understand where to prioritize your efforts as you go forward. Now, in that case, these are some of the considerations that you want to look at. You want to look at whether the tool is able to map the data and see lineage. Of course, you want to understand where the data came from, sensitivity, whether it can find sensitive data within your system, and whether that's manual or automated, right? Does it come out something out of the box that makes it very easy for me to do this? Does it have the ability to give me risk score or categorize the data after it's scanned it to be able to tell me where I need to focus? And of course, automating the classification of the data based on the organization's classification levels. And integration of capability with your catalogs, automated privacy workflows we talked about, and also the ability to alert you if they find a data store where, hey, there's a large amount of PII data here, and we need to go ahead and make sure that you are aware of that. And of course, compatibility, APIs, the ability to connect with other tools. And of course, we talked about the integration with DPI workflows. So just wrapping up, the policy section here, what you want to focus on is making sure that you have your policies, data policies and data regulations are not going away. Your policies help you to stay in compliance with that. And of course, it helps you to implement your data governance, privacy programs, or other programs within your data governance journey. And of course, there is a step-by-step, and there's some tools that are able to help you to accelerate that so that the process is not completely manual. Now, data quality is a big deal, right? So if I can't trust the data, it means nothing to me. And ultimately, bad data means bad decisions. And the statistics out there show that more than 50 to 60% of analysts and people that are using the data in their organizations spend most of the time trying to find the data that they need. And so data quality is a big issue for many organizations. And as you know, many organizations are also today constantly thinking about migration to the cloud. As you think about migrating to the cloud, you don't want to take data that's in your old legacy systems that aren't, your bad data, and move it into the cloud. And it's a great opportunity for many organizations to implement some kind of data quality strategy. And so we're going to talk about the two main areas here today. And those two main areas are proactive data quality management, which is very much in line with what we all know around data quality management already. And of course, data observability, which gives you the ability to detect things that you may not be able to find by just looking at the data. And so with DQM, proactive DQM, we're going to talk about, of course, how to profile your data, rule-based, creating rules to drive keeping your data clean and automating those processes for standardization and normalization. And of course, come up with a scorecard that will give you the ability to see the progress that you're making and be able to help you to identify which data is good and which data is bad and which data you need to take action against. Of course, anomaly detection is a bit different, where it's monitoring your environment, it's monitoring your data, and it's detecting things that you probably wouldn't find normally. It's identifying patterns, and it's using machine learning and AI to be able to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But as we talk about data quality means that your data is complete, it's valid, it's accurate, it's consistent, you can trust it, and it's timely. It means that that data is relevant for the time. When you are looking at that data, it's the most up-to-date data that you have. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these different data quality metrics can be achieved by implementing a data quality strategy. So if we go to the next slide here, we're going to talk through the process and the steps that you take, to be able to help you to assess and come up with some kind of a data quality, scorecard or program that will help you to trust your data better. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is you want to create some kind of, profile on the data. And a lot of times there are tools that are able to help you to do this. I'd say doing some of these activities manually, I wouldn't recommend it. Let's just say that much, because you're going to be recreating the wheel. But you want to use technology that's going to help you to accelerate these processes, right? And allow them to be consistent and persistent. So you want to create some profiling against your critical data. And the reason we talk about critical data here is, you may have 100 systems. You don't want to start with everything. Identify that data is going to give you the most value. And the way to do that is to identify your dashboards or your reports that are used for operational, to run the operations, or that drive, financial decisions within the organization, because they're going to more than likely give you the biggest bang. You want to make sure that that data is accurate. So if you look at those reports and you go backwards, identifying where those data sources, what is the report being generated from, what data source is it being generated from, it gives you the ability to start defining a scope of where to start. And that scope now gives you the ability now to help you to identify who are the owners of that data, right? And who are the custodians and stewards of that data. And once you figure that out, and you've now profiled the data and you know what the critical data elements are, you still want to start narrowing that down by creating your profiling rules based on what you see, right? So you don't want empty columns, or you want, to get rid of your duplicates, or you want to clean up the data, or you may want to standardize the data. And you also want to look at ways of doing this in a manner that's also not putting the organization at risk, right? If you're talking about dealing with data that may be PII data, for example, you want to make sure that the data is masked. And your automations help you to resolve those data quality issues. So when you create your rules, you want to also think about creating automations around those rules that will normalize the data. Normalization means that, all of your data in your tables are, all uppercase. Or standardization, maybe you are taking all of your telephone numbers and they don't have any parentheses or dots or spaces or dashes with them. They're just one straight number. And you have tools that will be able to help you to do that and accomplish that in an automated way without having to manually go in and do it. And of course, once you implement those rules and you've identified where those issues are, you want to, of course, have this running on an ongoing basis. But then you want to also work with your data engineers to be able to fix those issues at the root, right? So if you identify that, some of your columns are null or some of your data is incomplete, you want to look at maybe your entry systems to define, new rules around those systems, if possible, to be able to change that, or within your ingestion or your ETL processes or your streaming processes to be able to augment that data so that the data can be more complete. And so this process is a back and forth. As you are identifying and profiling the data and you're discovering new things, you're working with your engineers to make sure that you're cleaning the data, and of course, leveraging the capabilities within those different data quality tools to be able to allow that to happen. And then you want to be able to also, have statistics around this, right? So many of these data quality tools have the ability to create a scorecard. And this scorecard is what gives you the ability to see the progress that you've made. And so those scorecards can be created either manually from the statistics that are generated from your profiles, or they can be generated automatically from the tools that you have that basically will show you by column or by table the quality of that data. And it also gives you the ability to certify the data and put a stamp of approval on it so that other users can trust it. So this is a journey that anyone can take when they're thinking about how do I get started with my data quality journey and proactively implementing something to be able to clean up my data, right? Start with data that's critical in your organization, use the reports and dashboards, and go backwards from that, profile that data, refine those profiles, create repeatable rules around it. And then once you've created those repeatable rules, make sure that you implement something that you're working with your data engineers to constantly improve that and be able to measure the progress of that data over time using scorecards so that you're able to see according to these different metrics for completeness, conformity, consistency, duplicates, and integrity and accuracy, that those different metrics are being addressed as it pertains to your data quality journey. This is one of the proactive and things that you do when you're getting started. But another thing that a lot of organizations, and this is relatively new with is data observability, which gives you the ability now to look at the data and to identify things that some of the things that your proactive data quality tools are able to identify, but it also gives you the ability to identify things that you might not be able to see in your data by looking at a profiling result. Right, so your profiles may show you how many nulls, may show you the minimum value, the maximum value. It may show you duplicates. It may show you things of that sort, but it may not be able to show you how fresh is the data, right? When was this table updated? It may not be able to show you processes that are broken or expose to you processes that are broken that may delay the delivery of the data. Or you may expect 1,000 records to be updated in your tables on a nightly basis, but then you only get 500 updates 3 days in a row. Normally, it would take a very long time for individuals to be able to identify those anomalies. And those anomalies can drive business decisions. It could be an exposure that, hey, we usually get 5,000 sales every day. The last 3 days, we only got 3,000, which reflects in the sales table. So now you can take that information and take action on it. It's not necessarily that your data is bad, but it's giving you a visibility into your data that something may have gone wrong with a process, or something is going different or changing in your data within your organization that gives you the ability to now take action against it. And of course, schema changes happen. You're talking about changes to the environment. So you may add tables, you may add columns, you may add new whole schemas to a particular data store, and you want to get visibility into that. So those data observability tools give you visibility into your data store so that you're able to understand what is going on within that data store. It gives you the ability also to identify how you can take that information and potentially go back and fix architecture changes, data architecture changes, whether it's your streaming processes, your ETL processes, or even your reporting processes that may be failing. And this gives you some, visibility into it. And many of the tools give you field health tracking as well. So, identifying, okay, we used to have, particular values in this table. Now we see a number of nulls coming up. And you can basically also customize them many times with SQL rules that state, what you are looking for, right? So this gives a much broader spectrum where you're monitoring your data based on rules. A simple rule that you may create, for example, is on this particular table, we only want to see the state column populated with the state Florida. And if we see it populated with any other state, let's send a notification off to the data owner so that they're notified about this. And of course, as you can tell, as you're going through, and as we talked about earlier, that many organizations today are going through and they're looking at how they can migrate data from one environment, from their legacy systems to the cloud or to a new environment. And these data anomaly detection tools or data observability tools give you the ability to now look at your data after you've moved it. You may have gone through and done all the cleanup that you need to do with your proactive data quality management program. But now this is giving you the ability to track different things and even be able to, you can use this as well to also drive activity that is happening in your DQM process. And this is just something that's ongoing. Most of these tools also give you the capability of sending notifications to the owners and custodians of the data so that they can take action on it. So we talked about proactive data quality management. We talked about data observability. And we're going to talk about, of course, we also mentioned briefly just the whole migration strategy. But when you think about implementing and going for how you go forward, implementing this while you're doing your migration can significantly reduce the data quality issues that you have, because you're looking at the data. You want to be able to create new rules when you're moving the data. You may not need all of, it's like moving a house. You don't want to move all the old data, old stuff from the old house into the new house if you don't need it. And so these are some of the steps, of course, and this is a use case, of course, for organizations to be able to implement data quality within their organization, combining, proactive data quality management and anomaly detection. And then the tools that you have to select from. If you go to the next slide for me, please, Parul. So there are many tools that will help you to do this. And we have two variations here. So there's Calibra and Owl IDQ, which is comes integrated as a data catalog solution and also a data quality solution that also has data observability built in. It's one of the few tools out there that has a very holistic view of how you can put all of these things together. And then you have tools that are standalone data observability tools, and tools that are standalone data quality tools like Informatica IDQ, which is a standalone data quality tool for profiling your data, eliminating or cleansing your data, standardizing your data, normalizing your data, and of course, giving you a scorecard around the data. Monte Carlo and Big ID are data observability tools, ultimately that give you the ability to see what's going on, monitor your data, and give you the ability to send notifications off to the data owners and custodians who are responsible for data processing on a nightly basis. So if you're thinking about tools, these are some options that you have here. And then these are some of the criteria that you want to use when you're thinking about what to select. You want to make sure it's rule-based profiling is there. You want to make sure it has pattern detection, the ability to identify anomalies if it's an anomaly detection tool. As I mentioned, Calibra gives you the ability to do both the data quality profiling and, of course, anomaly detection and combine those. And then you have data cleansing and elimination, so the ability to cleanse the data and automate the cleansing of the data if it identifies data that is outside of the rules that you stated. Normalization, data scorecarding, of course, the ability for you to start generating reports for and taking not just scorecarding your data, but taking that and making it visible to the users of the data in the environments that they are using it. So if it's a cataloging tool, being able to say, hey, this particular column or this table is certified, and this is the one that you should use because it has been verified and some process has been put in place by data engineering teams or something like that to make sure that that data is good. And the self-service capabilities. So if you're looking for data quality tools, these are some considerations out there, and some of the things, if you don't like any of these and they don't meet your criteria, then these are some of the other criteria that you want to use in order to determine what would be best for your organization. As we said before, one size doesn't fit all. So, figure out where your ecosystem is, your data architecture, and what fits within that best. We're going to talk about the last area here, which is data cataloging. And data cataloging basically is, you know, the what, where, when, how, and who of your data. And ultimately, you just can't govern data you don't know. You don't know where your data is. You don't know who is using the data. You don't know how they're using the data. You're just not implementing data governance. And so data cataloging gives you the ability to accomplish that by centralizing your data and documenting it in a manner that will allow everyone to have access to it and understand what your data means. And of course, in understanding it, it gives more value. As I mentioned earlier, most data analysts or people you work with data on a day-to-day basis spend majority of their time trying to find the data. And this is one of the things that data catalogs help to solve. Many organizations may think, oh, why do I need to go and take all of our data from all these systems, put in this one place? It's a tedious task, we'll never do it. Highly recommend that you use a tool to help you to do that. We're going to talk about some of the tools and options that are available in the market to help you to accomplish this. But if you try to do this, you know, you may have 50 legacy data stores and Oracle, Teradata, MySQL, SQL Server. You know, then you have your cloud environment with Snowflake and Redshift and your reporting environments, Power BI, Tableau, Looker, you name it, right? And so you have data spread across all these different environments, and you want to be able to understand it. And trying to do that manually is a long and tedious task, right? You're going to see customer name or first name a million times across all these systems. How do I now take that information and understand it and be able to make it usable? And of course, as we talk about regulations as well, cataloging your data really helps you to be compliant with those data regulations, because it helps you to find your data better. And if you can find your data, it also helps you to give access to the organization that's using the data, so that data are now able to say, okay, I want to go look for where they have financial data for marketing. And you can search for it just like you would a Google search, and be able to see all the reports, all of the queries, all of the columns and tables, and even the owners and the individuals that are around it. Data catalogs basically give you the ability to catalog your data in 4 main ways, right? And we're speaking about those leading solutions in the marketplace, which is what you would be wanting to take on if you're going to be implementing some kind of data cataloging strategy. So you have your data sources, of course, your ETL processes, your streaming processes that are processing your data. That has metadata about your linkage and your lineage of your data maps, right? And then your data stores, your Snowflake, your cloud environments, of course, and your legacy systems like your Oracle and Hadoop. And of course, you have your reports where the data is being displayed and used as a presentation layer. So when you think about all of those things, you want to be able to create metadata around it. There are 4 main metadata areas that we want to talk about. There's technical metadata, business metadata, operational metadata, and social metadata, right? And so your technical metadata generally comes from your data stores automatically. You pull in all of your tables or your schemas, and that comes in naturally, right? So you pull it in, and it basically, the tool generally displays that information as it is. Further the work that needs to be done here. And this is like the first layer of basically getting an understanding of where your data is. And so as you bring all of this into one environment, you may have data that's in SQL and Snowflake and spread across many different tools, but by having all in one place, it gives you a complete vision of what your data landscape looks like. And so the next thing you want to be able to do is you want to create some business metadata around it, right? So you have terms within the organization that define what the data is, right? So your finance department defines customer in a certain way. Your marketing department defines it in another way. You want to be able to make sure that the definition of these terms within the organization are consistent. And your business metadata gives you the ability to put a name around it, because your column that comes out of your database might look like CUST_123, right? You are able to now say, okay, this is actually customer name. And then customer description is this particular value. And it's owned by this person and it's processed within these things. And of course, you have your metrics and things like that that are on your dashboards that you want to be able to define. how is this thing calculated? How is this particular metric calculated? Where did it come from? What is the business rule and requirements that are around generating this? And you're able to document those things within your catalog and then start to be able to associate them with the actual data, with the physical data. So it's not just a term that you're defining, but you're also able to say, hey, I have name here, that's customer name. Where does customer name physically reside across my enterprise? Whether it's all of the data stores that it resides in, all the reports it resides in, all of the queries that are using it, or what are the different processes and that are using this particular data element. And you may be even able to then delve deeper within that to be able to see the lineage. And data catalogs generally come with that capability of doing all of those things. And then there's operational metadata, which talks about your lineage of your data, of course. Where did the data come from? What are the different processes that are processing the data? And what's the status of this particular field? Can I trust it? We talked about integrating, things from your data quality solutions into your catalog to give visibility into data that people can trust, right? So, or your data anomaly detection tools that can state, hey, I know that this particular column in this table was not updated the last 2 nights. Let me go and integrate that particular notification within my catalog tool to tell the person that's using this particular field know that it wasn't updated. And that's the kind of visibility that a data catalog can provide to you. And then you can create social metadata around it to create additional context. If you have the owners of the data defined, right, or the custodians of the data, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. So your steward is your person that's using your data every day. It's a person that really understands the meaning of the data, understands where it is. They write the reports, they create the dashboards. They're the analyst, figuring out how best to use the data and probably know the data better than most. Then the custodians are those people that process the data. They might be the ones that are responsible for your stream processes, or they might use it to write some machine learning program or algorithm, or they might be the ones responsible for the data stores and making sure that the data stores are there and working properly so that the stores can access it, but they don't necessarily know the data. And of course, they're the owners of the data that are responsible for it, and basically they generally work with the stewards, or the stewards work with them by providing them information to be able to make decisions about how that data is used. So when you talk about social metadata, by integrating workflows within your data catalog, it gives you the ability to be able to take that information now and make it available to everybody so they can see the conversations that are happening around the data. Now, if you jump to the next slide for me, please. So just quick steps about how to set up your data catalog. If you're getting started or you're started already, I think these steps apply regardless, right? So the first thing, of course, is discovery. You make sure you connect to all of your data sources and you're ingesting all the information that's there. You want to make sure, of course, you're also identifying those owners. And again, we're starting with our critical data. So if you're just getting started, find out what's critical. What are those critical reports? Get that data documented and get people to be able to understand what that data means. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a data meta model, which gives you the ability now to associate your different metadata components and attach them to your different objects, data objects. And if you skip to the next slide, I'm just going to show you an example of that really quickly of what that looks like, and then jump back to this slide after. So this is a meta model of what, when I say a meta model, what it looks like. On the left, what you have are the individuals who are using the data, right? So your data owners or the custodians, and these are the individuals that will be responsible for doing different things. So across the top, what you see are your global attributes, which you may have global attributes that apply to all of your different data object types. Data object types would include your columns, tables, schemas, your domains, your queries, your reports, your data objects, joins, filters, and we could keep on going. But then you also have the different attributes that you want to associate with each of those different data objects. And you want to be able to give this to your stewards and your custodians and your owners so they understand what they are responsible for curating within each of those different data objects. Your organization may have it open, But generally speaking, you want to be able to be very clear about what attributes are going to be associated with which data object and how you're going to give that role and responsibility to the individual that's going to implement it. And then going on, we want to also make sure we organize our data and curate our data in a manner where we're able to find it. So by grouping the data together by domains or subject areas or departments or data sets, it gives you the ability now to take that information and make it easy for individuals to find it. And of course, creating business glossaries is another way of doing that. And then the lineage integration, most tools give you the ability to come with some kind of a lineage. You can automate it or have some kind of a manual lineage that you can integrate. We have accelerators that help people to accelerate the development of those. And of course, some tools come with machine learning capabilities that allow you to automatically tag and classify your data. And then you want to make sure you train your users and enable it to be able to use that meta model that you've created for your organization and how you define that you want to catalog your organization's data. If we go to the next slide, we're about to wrap up here. So these are some of the leading, cataloging, solutions in the market today. Again, we have Calibra, which comes with a number of different capabilities. There is Elation, which is a great, cataloging tool as well. The Axon from Informatica, cloud-based solution. And you want to make sure, by the way, your data cataloging solutions are cloud-based, right? Simply because you want it to be accessible to your organization. And also, most of those cloud-based solutions are the leaders in the current markets, in the market space when you talk about data catalogs. And many of these tools, as I mentioned before, also sell themselves as data governance solutions, but generally speaking, they either offer some component of data governance, but you want to be able to use one of these tools or, find one using the criteria that we have listed here. So the ability for them to do lineage, the ability for them to map your technical data to your business data without having to manually do it all the time. And what I mean by that is, you may have a customer name within your system 1 million times. You don't want to have to go in and custom, attach the description of that customer, term to that particular column 1 million times. You want the tool to be able to have a way for you to do that in mass. And if you add another column that looks like that particular, column, it also automatically does that. It should also have your business glossary, and it should have some kind of self-service, component that allows you to have a workflow to be able to communicate with other stewards and others in the organization about the data and store that social metadata. So for other people to be able to get the same insight that may be shared through those communications. And of course, your ability to intelligently search. So if I search for customer, I can show me, hey, I want to see the tables. I want to see the reports. I want to be able to see, the different terms or the queries or the filters that are used with that particular thing. You want the tool to have a really robust search capability so that it's very easy for people to be able to find the data based on how it's organized. And the ability for it to be integrated with other tools. And of course, the ability for them to have some kind of API that gives them the ability to connect with your, whether it's your privacy solutions or your data quality solutions that we talked about today, but you want that capability as well. That's all the time that I have. I am sure I went over, but hopefully the information I shared today was really valuable to each and everyone. And I want to just open up the floor right now to questions that you may have, and we'll go from there.
We already have a couple of questions. So the first question is, how do I get executive support for my data governance program?
That's a tough one sometimes, right? So I think most organizations face that challenge. I'd say that, one of the first things that you want to do is you want to identify a problem for the organization that is solvable using data governance. And I think when you're solving problems that either contribute to the organization's operations or to their bottom line, whether it's cutting costs or adding revenue, you can get a lot of support. And you also want to make sure that that initiative that you're starting with is simple. Don't go for the hardest thing. Go for something that's simple, you can easily deliver against it, And with that, after delivering that, many times you will see how you can generate that and start getting support across the enterprise. Most data governance initiatives start within somebody's department, right? But if you're solving big problems for the organization that overlap your department, you will be able to start generating and using and leveraging that to be able to go out there and get the executive support around it. And with another teeth or a tool that you can use to really do that today is data regulations, right? So a lot of the data regulations have fines, and they come with some really embarrassing situations for organizations. Nobody wants to be on the front page of, the Wall Street Journal or CNN or, in the public if they have violated or they are found non-compliant. So that's another way of also helping to get the support of your executives by delivering value, finding something that's simple, that's going to add value to them operationally or financially, and of course, using the different regulations as a driver to get them to act. And data governance is a way to be able to solve those problems. And I see, how do we figure out which data set to start with? Yeah. So you want to find the data set that is being used the most, are critical to the organization. So one of the things that I usually say is, what are the critical reports? What are the critical dashboards, right? So whatever data or what are the data, what's the data that's queried the most, right, within your system? And some of these cataloging tools give you that information. So when you ingest the data within the system, it will show you, it may have a popularity score, or it may show you the most used queries or the most used reports. And so that gives you some idea of what data is important to the organization. So you can use that as a driving force to be able to figure out where to get started. So look at the data that's being used the most, looking at the reports that are adding the value for, again, going back to, the first question is the question, what data is being used around for operations, and which data is going to drive some financial benefit to the organization, and start with that data, or the data that everyone's complaining about, right? You want to start there to be able to start addressing those concerns and solve those problems for them. I think that's a great data set to start with. It's going to be different for every organization. What are the metrics to assess whether my program is supporting business success? So those are, it depends. So data governance has a number of different functions, right? So that's a very difficult question to answer just randomly, but I'll use data quality as a metric, right? So you can use the quality your data quality program as a way to show and demonstrate, using your data scorecards, the trust that people have within the data, right? So, and how you do that is, let's just say we have a table that is critical for a financial report, but there are issues with the time that it takes for it to be processed or the data within it. And you're able to change that, and you're able to demonstrate using some visual, capability, a graph, or some report or dashboard to say, hey, this data has moved from, being 80% accurate or 50% accurate to being 80% accurate or 90% accurate. You can demonstrate a way of, and how that impacts now the report that someone is using and the time it takes for them to trust that data and to be able to use it, and how that could potentially have a business impact. Another thing also is cataloging. So cataloging, one of the things that it significantly reduces for analysts is the amount of time it takes for them to find their data. So you can also use that metric as a way to be able to measure, the programs, in that case, the program's success by pointing to specific cases. How do you see data governance evolving in the coming years? What is the future of it? I think data governance is going to transform a lot because of the new regulatory landscape. With all of these new, there's two things really. So there is migration to the cloud, right? Because a lot of companies and technology vendors and providers are actually not even supporting their on-prem solutions anymore. And so you see this need for organizations now, whether they want to or not, because they're not getting the technical support anymore from their vendors, the need for them to move to the cloud. And so I see that as a big driving force. People are ultimately always engaging in data governance within their organization in some capacity. What I think is going to change is that this is going to become more formalized, right? And so the processes around it are going to be more clearly defined. They're going to be formalized and documented. You're going to see a lot more accountability that's going to come into play, which is another pillar of data governance, because the accountability ties back to the need to be compliant with the different regulations that exist. So you want to be able to implement these, these data governance initiatives so that you can make sure that your organization is not going to be at risk. So I see a shift in terms of the amount of organizations that are going to be taking it on. And I also see a shift in the way that we look at data governance. I think data governance is looked at a lot of times as, oh, I'm doing cataloging, or I'm doing privacy, or I'm doing data quality, right? And it's not one of those things, it's all of those things and how those things come together. And I think people are going to mature in the way they start thinking about it in a more holistic manner versus just the very siloed manner that we're currently looking at it. So that's how those are the ways I think data governance is going to change and evolve as time goes on. I think that's it for questions. Are there any more?
I think these are the questions with us. So if at all there are any other questions, you can email us at marketing@faxpan.com.
Okay.
Thank you, Charles. That was such an enriching session.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope the information was helpful to everybody. And of course, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to see how we can, help to get you started on your data governance journey or help you to mature your data governance program if it already started already.
Thank you. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Take care.
Take care.